everyone, and thank you for tuning in to the Smarter Building podcast powered by Symetri. My name is Nicole Georgiou, and I'm the Architecture, Engineering and Construction Marketing Manager at Symetri UK and will be your host for today. We decided to start this podcast to help everyone involved in the design, construction and ongoing operation process of a building keep up with the evolving digital landscape in construction as client demands for smarter and more sustainable building grows. Every other week, we chat with industry experts around best practice, new legislation, trends and technology, and one of the hot topics in the industry right now is fire safety. On today's show, I'm joined by Varun Soni, partner at calfordseaden and implementation co-lead on the executive team of the UK BIM Alliance, who has also had some involvement in the creation of the recently released BS 8644 standard. So thank you for joining us, Varun. It's great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
So before we delve in to the world of fire safety, could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, your interests and your hobbies?
Okay, yeah. As you said, Nicole, I'm partner head of digital transformation at calfordseaden. Been there for about 5.5 years now. I'm also part of the Building Regulation Advisory Committee's Golden Thread Working Group, and they were the ones that published the Golden Thread principles on the government website earlier last year. And in terms of my hobbies, I guess I used to be an ex-professional rugby player, so that's one of the big hobbies I've always had is rugby. And I've only recently undertaken golf, not very well, but starting to learn. And I love anything tech related, so I'm a bit of a tech geek.
Excellent. We'll have to try and catch you on the golf course one day.
Definitely.
And now, sort of back to business, could you give us some more information on your professional background and your involvement in fire safety and the creation of the BS 8644 standard?
Yeah. So in terms of myself, I studied architecture by trade. Worked very much in a multidisciplinary firm since I came out of university, and I've always been very much involved in BIM and then information management, working through the PASs, working through the ISO standards, and that's very much where my involvement even into the standard came. It was very much about how we align this to the UK BIM framework and how we actually just bring principles of information management into the standard itself. So my involvement was very information management focused from the time I went in there.
Yeah, and I guess do you sort of see it being similar to the ISO implementation? Do you think people are going to sort of take a long time to adjust to it, or how do you think it's sort of going to go down?
Well, I think when we start thinking about fire safety and when we start thinking about you know what's actually come about, there's always been a need and a push, and certainly since the tragedy of Grenfell, to really focus our minds on fire safety and fire information. I think it's always been something since the mandate came about that we did want better information within our assets, and I think one of the biggest areas is, and one of the things that's actually come about is the government now focusing very heavily on better information management through these through the Building Safety Act and through the Golden Thread requirements. So it is important that this is pushed along. I don't think it will be as difficult to adjust. And I think if you look at the UK BIM framework, it's changing the way in which we perceive BIM. Everybody always thought of BIM as being a 3D model, whereas really we're focusing on better information management. So following principles is a lot easier when we start focusing on information and not just about using software to create 3D images and not being able to tell them the benefits about it.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely agree. And so for those that might not have looked at it in detail yet, could you just briefly describe what the standard entails and its purpose? Obviously, you mentioned Grenfell, but yeah, could you just give us a brief description?
So the code of practice, it's basically the British standard is the code of practice. It's basically about how we have exchanged fire safety information so that it's accessible by those that actually require the information at the right time. And it's about how it actually how you update and how you keep fire safety information throughout that life cycle. So it looks at the planning, the briefing, design, construction process, even looking at handover, how you actually occupy and look after a building, and also what happens in the event of emergency responses actually coming about. The way the standard was set up, it was set up so that you would be able to have the UK BIM framework principles set out within there, and in terms of how we manage fire safety. But we also had a part where, for those that didn't feel comfortable jumping straight into the UK BIM framework, there was almost like a stopgap where they would be able to learn about information management processes, not following the UK BIM framework, but almost aligned to it, so that it became a foundation to build upon. And that's how this standard has actually been built and set up.
Yeah, and I guess you've sort of just answered this one, but what do you think has brought us to this point, and why do you feel now is the right time for the creation of this standard?
Well, I think when we start thinking about fire safety, certainly within our industry, it's been very absent, and so is guidance relating to information management on fire safety for quite a while. So when you think of fire engineers, consultants, risk assessors, and those that contribute and receive this information, they don't really know, and there's no real consistency of how information should be set out when it comes to fire safety. So that's really why this has actually been brought about. If you then take it a bit further, if you look at Dame Judith Hackett's independent review of building regulations and fire safety, very much hits upon those points, and that's really why this standard came about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and from your point of view, what has the response been to the Act and the standard? Things sort of had to change. There had to be more accountability in the design, build and management. But yeah, how do you think it's sort of gone down so far?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously we had the tragedy at Grenfell, and I think people should never lose sight of that. And I think if we look at what's come about since that tragedy, if we look back at Dame Judith's Hackett report, she identified the need for a cultural change within our industry, the need to update our building regs to be more specific on fire safety and building safety in general, and that there needed to be a requirement for digital audit trails, which was now known as that golden thread.
Yeah.
So I think it's been touched upon for over 5 years now that this is needed to come about. People have known exactly what was coming in the Safety Act, although there are some that say there isn't enough information out there. I think there has been enough in terms of the response, if you look at building safer reports and everything else, to say this is what is coming. And now with the Act, I think it gives a very good overview and a very good breakdown of what really is coming into the way in which we work, how clients and how the supply chains have adjusted to it have varied. We've worked on a lot of projects. We are seeing clients are now understanding what they need to do as building owners, and I think that's very important. We do see there is a mix in contractors, and certainly how they look at implementing this standard. A lot of them who are currently working on projects see this as an issue of, well, we'll hand the building over beforehand. But at the same time, there have been some very good contractors that have said, it's actually our duty to do this, we'll do it. So it's been very mixed in terms of the reaction. I think over time, and as clients are more educated on what they need to be doing when it comes to building safety and golden thread, I think you will find that contractors and supply chains will just do this as business as normal.
Yeah, and I guess it's sort of like we touched on earlier, similar to the whole BIM thing. Still, not everyone is even using BIM. It's gonna take quite a long time. But yeah, it's just sort of that sort of leads me on to my next question. So, what do you think the biggest challenge will be in the successful adoption and compliance with the Act and the standard?
In all honesty, I think it's education, and I think it's education in a couple of areas. Education in understanding um, what tools are needed in order to actually, comply with the golden thread, and I think education as well to make sure that clients and owners don't just jump at software straight away. We've seen certainly a lot of software providers and creators saying our software is the golden thread, but the golden thread legislation hasn't even come out yet. So how can they say that?
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of fear mongering in our industry, and that leads to impulse buys that then work out not to be the right buy. So I think an education piece to clients to say, look, these are the principles. This is what the golden thread is. Um, this is what we should be focusing on, and this is what you should be looking at. Is very important. And it's not to say that they will not need to purchase software or whatnot. There will be, but you have some software vendors that will say it's one solution, it's one software. But then you also have some very good ones that will say, actually, we need to make sure it suits you as a client and how you work. So that education piece is really important. And I also think that education piece on what actually, does it mean to comply with the act, with the golden thread throughout the life cycle is very important, because it could be different solutions throughout that life cycle. And I think that's important to the whole industry to know. It's not just the end user. I think everyone needs to know that. And I think there also just needs to be a general sense of education when it comes to information management processes. Structured information, being able to access the right information at the right time. These are going to be key parts of Golden Thread. And we need to make sure that all the supply chain are aware of the digital requirements that come into that. If it's BIM, if it's not BIM, they still need to be aware of it. So education, I think, is going to be the biggest part of this.
Yeah, and I guess it's also, it's about internal processes as well. You've sort of got to have those in place before you even look at software, right? So that again is down to the education piece. So how do you think we will get that education piece? What are we
Well,
doing to get that out there?
I think there's some really good initiatives already that are out there, and some really good resources available. You've got things like the BIM for Housing Association Toolkit. They just launched, I think, their second version only recently, but that provides a foundation of a lot of core information pieces. It has a set of AIRs, EIRs, COVID data, even data dictionaries. These are fundamental parts of a foundation that help you build within your organization. So it's a freely available tool. Download it, have a look at it. Not all of it's going to be relevant, but there will be parts that you'll be able to see live examples of, which I think is very beneficial. You then also have the UK BIM Framework website. On there are a lot of resources. They've got guidance, and it's certainly worth reading. And then you've also got the Alliance website, which also leads into Bazooki and some of the great work they're doing. And when you start looking at these sort of resources, they have things like Back to BIM Basics, starting to understand information management procedures, even YouTube videos that they've got. And I think, where you look at these, you look at certain industry professionals, events, those sort of things where people can attend, they can go, they can speak to people that are in the industry. That will always help. And then what I would also be saying is, over time there will be. I know the government have already had fact sheets that now they've withdrawn, but they're out at consultation at the moment for secondary legislation. It'll only be a matter of time before more information will come out on their website. HSC are providing information. Just making sure that you're registered with the right providers, looking at specific articles that are coming out of them with industry professionals that are working on it. I think that's where you're really going to get the right information. We were just talking about UK Construction Week. We've obviously got your event as well on the 20th. You're going to have industry professionals that are working on this sort of legislation, working with these. Listen to them. That's where you're going to learn.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess the good point there you said is just people, going to these things, sort of mingling and chatting to people in the industry as well, because people will have differing views. So yeah, I think that's definitely a good piece of advice. And then you also sort of touched on technology there. So do you agree that there are systems that are sort of ready to tackle this, or
Definitely.
do you think more needs to be done? What are your views on, sort of software helping to comply with the standard?
I think software will definitely be required. Um, in terms of what software and when, that's the big debate I think in the industry at the moment. You start thinking about single source of truths, and you start thinking about the golden thread. I mean, during a project, starting that audit trail, there are tools available that you can use. I'm not going to say which ones, but we all know if you were to follow things like the UK BIM framework and the ISO standards, they certainly allow you a system or multiple systems that you can use. Um, as I said, it's not always about the capturing the 3D models and whatnot, but there are ways in which you can obtain structured information. So that sort of system is available, and to be fair, 90% of those that I work with and work alongside tend to be utilising them. There is certainly a need to develop more interoperable systems and solutions that will allow you to go from the design and construction over to the maintenance and asset management. Definitely needs to be worked on. Um, there needs to be more inclusive and interoperable solutions when it comes to that. I don't think we've got it right yet on the facility side. There are some very good systems on the facility side, but it's how we can then develop that to work and sync well with the development side, because processes alone is not going to be the way. Software will help us to do that, and software will help us to actually enforce those processes. And if we can become more productive whilst doing it through, automated routes where we can put the review processes in, it will just make sure that the information is going to be better and right. So I think software is going to play, and technology will play a very important part going forward in our journeys within this industry. There are certainly some that we could utilize and benefit from now. But I do think the industry should always be developing, and I think for me that inclusivity part is very important. It's not about only those that can afford it being able to use software. It should be that everybody, given the opportunity, should be able to digitize their assets.
Yeah, and that sort of leads well on to my next question, because do you think there will sort of be any additional benefits to come out of the new regulation other than fire safety? So, better adoption of BIM, a bigger shift towards digital. I guess it's all sort of learning curve for everyone at the moment, isn't it?
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it, if we start going down that better information management route, you're going to have a better understanding of what's going into your building. You're going to be able to measure the performance of your building, and you could even take it further. Start thinking about the Internet of Things. If you've got a digital solution that will be able to work with that, you can start measuring performance. You can measure asset components to understand, well, what asset components are breaking more, which ones are we having to replace more. Certainly with the cost of living and how we are purchasing building materials right now, that would be very beneficial to asset owners if they know that one product is actually going to perform and work better than than another one. These are things that can be easily measured using digital technology, and certainly I think there are many benefits to come out of that. And when we start looking at the construction playbook and everything else that's come out, this is what it all leads on to. And when we start thinking about net carbon zero and whatnot, using technology will allow us to get there. I don't think we're there yet, if I'm honest, but certainly solutions will be coming out to help us over the next few years. So I think it can only be a positive going digital and going towards that information management
Yeah,
route.
and hopefully this will sort of be a trigger to push that, to get people to working in that smarter way, and like you said, helping the operation of buildings, etc.
Yeah.
And then the Building Safety Act and this standard, they look to regulate this capture of data on all buildings over 18 metres high. Will the adoption of these practices be rolled out more widely, and when do you think this will sort of happen?
I would expect that it would be rolled out certainly under another phase to potentially buildings that are lower than 18 metres. What I would also say is it would make sense to capture information on all your assets, not just those that are over 18 metres. If you want to, it's not just about building safety here, but if you want to be able to look at the performance of your buildings and your assets and your products, then it would make sense for you to go digital. And for consistency purposes as well, you are not going to want to have two different types of systems obtain information in two different ways. It's not going to make you productive in the way in which you work. So it will be rolled out, I'm sure. In terms of a time frame, I don't have that, so I'm not gonna give a date. But certainly, I think that digital route for your day-to-day operation, it would just make sense to capture it on all. And certainly what I've seen with clients is they don't just say, oh, 18 meters and above or 7 stories and above. They treat every single building as a high risk asset because it's a lot of money for them.
Definitely, no, that's good to hear. And what's next for you personally? You've been involved in obviously helping contribute to the standard. Is it the development and evolution and support around adoption of it, or is there anything else that you'll sort of be involved in?
Yeah, there's a lot of work going on within the industry to get the message of information management across. So I'll be continuing my work there, working with the UK Alliance. Obviously, they're going through a little bit of a rebrand themselves to NEMA. So when you're probably listening to this, it will be NEMA. So I will be working very closely with them and continuing my work in my role and involvement there. And continuing on the development of standards. It's something that I'm very passionate about, and very passionate about being able to help those within our industry. So that will definitely continue to develop.
Excellent, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Varun. And we and the rest of the Symetri team look forward to seeing you again at our event on the 20th of October, embracing digital tech for fire safety compliance. And like you mentioned, that's at the Institution of Engineering and Technology. Thank you very much, and we will look forward to speaking to you then.
Thank you, Nicole.
And don't forget to follow, subscribe to ensure you don't miss an episode. Stay tuned for our next few podcasts where we'll be continuing on the topic of fire safety, the exciting world of AR and VR in construction, and digital twins.